Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We hope that it was okay getting here in spite of the rain. For those of you who were with us at the dinner yesterday, perhaps you had a good evening. Welcome for our foreign visitors to the Czech Republic. Welcome, everyone, both in the room and also online, to Prague, to Grabovka Villa, to IFES and the IFES Regional Europe Office, which is hosting this event. I'm Magnus Oman. I'm director of the IFES Regional Europe Office and senior political finance advisor. A couple of words about IFES and our Regional Europe Office. IFES is a non-profit, non-governmental organization that was set up in 1987 to support electoral processes very broadly defined. We have supported initiatives in over 145 countries around the world so far. Been working with democratic stakeholders in Europe since the fall of the Iron Curtain, with initiatives from Albania through Norway to Ukraine. And in Europe, our work has gradually moved from supporting technical election administration to more working with supporting efforts in favor of democratic resilience. And as part of that progression, the Regional Europe Office was set up here in the Villa 10 years ago. This is our 45th in-person event. We've been honored to welcome over 800 people from over 50 countries. And we work in a wide range of areas to support efforts against disinformation, anti-corruption and political finance transparency, cybersecurity in election processes, inclusion in elections, electoral justice, and election administration. And overarching all of this is to support electoral integrity and to counter foreign interference. So the Regional Europe Office work is a complement to that through IFES country offices in a lot of countries across Europe. Some of you work in countries where we have a particular office and you work directly with our colleagues. This work is to complement that. And our main idea is to convene people, electoral, democratic professionals and activists, just like we are doing here today, to discuss, learn from each other and identify common solutions that can then be adapted and deployed in individual countries. In short, we see ourselves as the IFES Europe Democracy Exchange. And the IFES work through the Regional Europe Office is part of a larger USAID-funded program of democracy assistance with the goal of supporting leadership that champions democratic practices, and is made possible through the generous support of the American people. And with that, I hand over to my colleague Daria.
Thank you, Magnus. Good morning, everyone. It's such a sincere pleasure to welcome you all here, both all of you in the room, as well as those joining us online. I know that many of you had quite a trek to be here, not least all of our colleagues from Ukraine. And then there's also the rain this morning, so we really appreciate it. And although I can't make any promises, we will do our best to make it worth your while. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daria Azariev-North. I'm a senior program manager with our Europe and Eurasia team at our IFES headquarters in Washington, D.C., where I oversee a broad portfolio of programs in the region, with a particular focus on supporting democratic resilience and countering foreign influence. I've actually been with IFES for almost 10 years now. And I'll also share that I am a first-generation Polish American, so all of these issues of supporting democracy across Europe are very close to my heart. As Magnus noted, one of the primary mandates of our Regional Europe Office is to bring together electoral stakeholders to build their capacity in responding to the old and new challenges to electoral integrity and democratic resilience in the region. And a big part of that is all of us learning from each other. So please go ahead. So a big part of that is us all learning from each other. And that really is what we hope to achieve today with all of you. really taking advantage of all of the broad range of perspectives and expertise that we have in the room. Our event today is dedicated to looking at how social media, technology, information integrity have come to play extremely prominent roles in the outcomes of our elections. And we've come to know 2024 as the year of elections, though they are taking place amidst an increasingly shifting geopolitical landscape and technology landscape. This includes a broad range of challenges, of course, with growing autocracy and populism across the world, not just Europe. Trust in elections and democratic institutions is also very precarious in many parts of the world. There's, of course, the increasing threat of foreign interference from both domestic and foreign actors, particularly Russia and China. And then there's the role of technology and AI and the way in which it's exacerbating many of these threats. And then the lack of regulations and shifting roles of tech companies. And a lot of what we'll be talking about today are all of these challenges that we've, heard so much about by now around AI and the role of technology in these outcomes of our elections and democratic processes. But there's also been a lot of hype around it. And so while it's really important that we're cognizant of this being a legitimate threat with significant potential implications, it's also important that we are thinking about how we are framing this issue as an international community, and that we're not just playing defense. So one big goal of today that we hope to achieve with you all is looking at how we can also leverage AI technology for good and for defending democracy. As we look ahead, it's also important to note how malign actors are increasingly coordinating, sharing tactics, learning from each other. And that really underscores the importance of a holistic approach and us democratic actors also working together, learning from each other, and coordinating. So we really hope that we can leverage this great forum today to look at how we can work together across sectors to build resilience. And then finally, just a few housekeeping items. The first two sessions are online. We're very grateful to all of you joining us online. Sessions 3 and 4 will be closed. And in the interest of time, we will skip introductions. For those of you who didn't have a chance to meet, connect yesterday at dinner, we really encourage you to leverage the discussion portions of our sessions, the coffee breaks, the lunch, to get to know each other and connect. And then also, whenever you're asking a question, we do kindly ask that you briefly introduce yourself, both in person and online. And then finally, I just want to briefly introduce some of the great team members that will be helping us lead this event today with me. Alexei Sidorchuk, Katarina Rozumikova, that's been our hero on the logistical front, and also Nicoletta Dioshi, who's online. So with that, I really look forward to all of the discussions with you. Thank you again for making it here. So I would now like to ask our panelists for session 1 to join me up front. Make yourselves comfortable. Great. So we'll dive right into session 1, which is really dedicated to looking at the European Parliament elections from this year and trying to extrapolate main lessons learned, especially from the perspective of AI, disinformation, and coordination. I think we all know by now the European Parliament elections this year were one of the biggest contests in this year of elections, where more than half of the world's population will have the opportunity to vote. And really following the 2019 European Parliament elections, when we saw a steep rise in Russian propaganda, foreign interference, along with the rise of new technology and those challenges posed by AI, there was a high level of foreign interference anticipated in these elections, and it was sustained in many ways through various cases. When we look at the European Parliament elections and consider that it really was 27 individual elections, the vulnerability of them was quite high, considering that an attack on a single country could have cast doubt on the entire process. And we did see many efforts on that front. We'll talk more about this during the session, but a few examples to note in the lead up were, of course, there was the Voice of Europe scandal where members of parliament were paid to speak for the Kremlin. There was continued to be very prominent narratives around trying to decrease support for Ukraine. We saw a continuation of Russian propaganda and disinformation narratives amplified by local actors and right-wing parties in particular. And we also saw examples of right-wing parties leveraging AI in their campaigns, such as in the case of Italy and France. On the other hand, we also saw the EU take on some unprecedented initiatives to try to mitigate and prevent these threats. So we'll dive into that quite a bit with our experts. And during the session, we'll get several perspectives on what these actual threats were, what their impact was, and try to examine what are the lessons learned, if any, hopefully for the remaining elections this year and beyond. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our panel of experts for this session. First, we'll have Marian Lunella joining us online virtually, who is the European Parliament's spokesperson. She's worked as a government lawyer specialized in legislation and is currently a communications advisor in European Parliament's spokesperson unit. Previously, she was an Estonian civil servant and diplomat, and also possesses experience with the European Commission's General Secretariat. Then we'll hear from Armin Rabic, who is the chairperson of Election Watch EU, a nonpartisan election observer organization which conducts election assessment missions of European Parliament elections across the 27 member states. Armin works as an advisor, including for European institutions, and is the author of several reference documents in elections related to human rights and AI, which we'll hear more about today. And last but not least, we'll hear from Ingrid Bicu, who is a research associate with the University of Salamanca in Spain. And her career has focused extensively on exploring the opportunities and challenges driven by emerging technology on democracy, security, and international affairs through a human rights lens, with a particular focus on women and marginalized groups. So it'll be very interesting to also hear that perspective and the intersection of those different issues, especially as we have this broad array of stakeholders with us here today. So with that, I am pleased to hand it over to our first speaker, Marian. Marian, could you tell us what are some of the notable experiences with disinformation campaigns that you witnessed in the run-up to the European Parliament elections this year, and how did the European Parliament handle them?
Thank you, Daria. Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, IFES, for having me online. So yes, indeed, I work in the spokesperson's unit of the European Parliament. Our role is also to coordinate within the European Parliament the disinformation policy and to support the members in fighting against it. I wish I was there in the Czech Republic today with you, but I heard that actually this morning Brussels has only one slight advantage. Today we have a blue sky instead of the rain, although Brussels have been breaking the rain records of more than 130 years this year, so we've had so much rain. But I would like to share with you a bit of photo materials. So if you allow me, I will share my screen. So I have a couple of slides. So I work in the spokesperson's unit, but the spokesperson of the parliament is my boss. So for us, it's at a director general level. What were we afraid of in the run-up to the elections? So here are images from Brussels on the 1st of February. This was the day when the European Parliament and the European quarters, so other EU institutions also, were surrounded by at least 1,000 tractors who were coming from Belgium, but also from neighboring countries. The reason they came on that particular date was that on that day, the European Council was meeting to adopt an aid package for Ukraine of 50 billion euros. And in the run up to that European Council meeting, we saw in social media a lot of fake accounts being created. In Germany alone, it was 50,000 fake accounts to amplify the message that let's not support Ukraine, let's support our domestic policies instead, let's support the farmers. So this was the result of this big campaign. And of course, while there were genuine farmers present, there were also very violent protesters that farmers themselves were hesitant in saying were those people really farmers who were as aggressive in the streets of Brussels. And we've seen images also from elections, presidential elections previously in the US and in Brazil, where you had people storming the official buildings saying the elections were stolen. So what we were prepared for, and luckily what didn't realize on the evening of the 9th of June, was that there might be a hybrid threat or even a physical threat to the premises, or that there might be also physical threats to member state election authorities. So luckily that did not realize, but we were very thoroughly prepared for that. So the basis for the European Parliament and the members in the last mandate and even before have always hammered in their different decisions that the basis for the fight against disinformation is to give citizens and people the access to information. So that's why the Parliament always emphasizes to have it in all the official languages, and even beyond. There are frequently asked questions that the members can also refer to when they need to debunk or correct disinformation that is spread about the Parliament or about its policies, but also what the Parliament's services use. Then Parliament's meetings are web streamed. You can find the documents online, you can read it. Parliament has a strong social media presence. There are press releases and different kinds of approaches for press to make the House more transparent. And we also welcome visitor groups. Last year it was 400,000 people who came to visit the European Parliament plenary chamber just to see how the European democracy works. And here in the center bottom, you see this is the landing page of the European Parliament.
Marianne, sorry to interrupt. Maybe would you like to change the slide?
What are you seeing now?
The introduction slide.
Yes, let me see. Does it go on now? Do you see election integrity?
It's still the first one.
Oh, that is a problem. Let's see. So you see a photo?
There we go.
Does it go on now?
Yes.
Okay.
Super.
All right. Thank you for, okay. So here we have the title of the slide is Access to Information. Yes? Yes. I cannot see you. I can only see my presentation. Sorry about that. So yeah, at the bottom there, we made a public page about foreign interference and how the Parliament is fighting. So this is the public information and the resources we have. So this we share with all stakeholders. Then going on, ahead of the elections, we made at the elections.europa.eu page a specific section for elections integrity. I heard you mentioning that word in your work as well, so that is music to our ears as well. So there we made a dedicated section for citizens on cybersecurity, how is data protected and what is this information and where you can learn more. So all about proactively communicating. And then one of the ways that Parliament fights disinformation is also the resilience building of its visitors, but also of its staff and of its members. You see on the right-hand side, there is this disinformation, cyber attacks and hybrid threats handbook. This is now something that is not public, as we only delivered it to the members of European Parliament, but also staff can have access to it. So these are like practical tips, how they can be aware what kind of threats are surrounding them and how they can counter them, starting from how to manage their social media wall, but also how to behave at missions and what are the warning signals when they receive a suspicious email or whatnot. We have also expos for members, different workshops and info sessions where they can also get the cyber tips, such as which phishing emails are suspicious and what to do when your passwords may have been leaked, and so on and so forth. More public resources that we made ahead of the elections. So here now you should see a European elections educational toolkit. This one was delivered for educators and for schools all across the EU via the Parliament networks. So there was a specific module for teachers to use in classrooms on this information, including a quiz. For volunteers, we had also 10 ways to tackle this information, so practical tips. And then on the right-hand side, you see this is a compass, so how to spot when news is fake and what to do about it. So these are all public materials. Then we made videos. So these are 3 series of videos about how this information works. We made them in 24 languages, and the External Action Service even took it further and translated into 10 additional languages, including Ukrainian, Russian, Mandarin, and so on. So these are also available on the site of the Parliament, on YouTube, and on the External Action Service. Then, just ahead of the elections, on the 5th of June, we had a joint press conference. So this was dedicated effort to the media to tell them, yes, we have threats. Yes, we are countering them. And yes, more importantly, we are cooperating with other institutions. And we also released a press statement and gave background information, and also highlighted the cooperation we have with civil society. Then this is now about the election weekend. On the left-hand side, you see some debunks that the Parliament did in Italian language only, because in Italy we saw some disinformation and just information manipulation going around in social media, that one should not go to vote, and if you do not if you do not go to vote, you also show not only your attitude towards these elections but EU as a whole. So we had an extra push to invite the Italian voters to go and vote. And then on the both these right one videos, these were TikTok and Instagram videos, so targeting younger audience to raise their awareness about this information. And we see we use some very simple and let's say even a bit entertaining content to grasp their attention. Overall, in the
thank you, Marion. So just to make sure I'm keeping us on track in terms of time, it would be great if we could
very good.
move to focusing on, if you could speak a bit about how the European Parliament cooperates with other EU institutions, in particular, other member states and stakeholders, and if there's any recommendations in particular that the European Parliament has for countries across Europe to better protect information integrity in future elections.
Shall I do it right away?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, so what is our conclusion from this election is that the coordination networks that we do have in place, they did provide useful, because when we had questions, then some of our partners had the answers. Parliament cooperated with member states, with member state election authorities. We had also cooperation at cyber level, cooperation also at hybrid threats level. So it was hand in hand. And we did also joint exercises, which proved useful because we were better prepared for the election week and for the election weekend. And then we established also informal contacts throughout different conferences and seminars we did. For example, last November, we had a conference in Parliament here in Brussels, where we brought together fact checkers and digital editors, so our civil society partners, with the members of European Parliament and with different EU institutions. So we did very extensively different kinds of networks, and maybe to highlight the work of the rapid alert system that is the point of contact from each member state, External Action Service, European Commission, and also European Parliament, and other guest parties in it. So we did manage to learn a lot from member state elections, best practices, to exchange them and to use this information ahead of the European Parliament elections. So that would be all from me for an introduction, but happy to come in later on as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marianne, so much. And I think you hit on a very important point there at the end, which is what we hope to focus on, particularly in terms of that exchange and working broadly across sectors and stakeholders. And I'm sure we'll have many questions for you during the Q&A. So thank you again. Armin, over to you. Could you tell us a bit about how the EU so far has regulated the use of AI and campaigning online, and what more can the EU do to build resilience to the threats posed by AI to electoral integrity?
Thanks. Maybe this one is better. Yeah, I think this one is better. Yeah, you know, Election Watch EU has now conducted the second election assessment mission to the European Parliament elections. So the first one was in 2019, and now for the 2024, we are again across all 27 member states, we conducted an assessment. And one major focus was all the online space of the electoral campaigning. And we compare now 2019 to 2024, we see a huge change of the regulation framework, yeah, of elections. So the European Union passed the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act, the AI Act, the Freedom of the Media Act. They came up with a transparency and targeting of political advertising regulation, anti-SLAPP regulation or directive. So, you know, these are huge steps which happened in the last 2 years. On top of that, in 2018, there's this general data protection regulation in place. Now, while the EU achieved all these regulations and new laws within the last 2 years, they need to be enforced now in the coming years and months ahead. Yeah. So, for example, the Digital Services Act foresees digital service coordinators in each member state of the European Union. However, not all member states have yet implemented corresponding domestic legislation. Not all member states have yet established digital service coordinators. So, for example, so far, I think the European Commission came up with 12 infringement procedures against member states to force them and to urge them to implement the legislation to the letter and to establish these digital service coordinators, which are key to oversee the implementation of the Digital Services Act. Yeah, and we need to separate here between the very large online platforms, these VLOPs, which have 45 million, I think, monthly users. It's the like of Google and Meta and TikTok and X. And they are under the responsibility of the European Commission, but then the digital service coordinators in the member states, they have to monitor all the others in the member states, like in Czech Republic, that would be Seznam. Yeah. And in this sense, we see a huge step forward. Now, when we look at the importance of AI in elections, we could say very few member states like Greece or Ireland have legislation in place to label AI in elections. Yeah, and our mission only detected some AI use in election campaigning in few member states like Germany, Croatia, Ireland, Denmark, but we also heard that it was used in France and Italy. And, you know, examples have been fake supporters in Ireland for political party, for example, or a fake video by the German chancellor in calling for a ban of the right-wing AfD in Germany. Corresponding, we had in similar electoral campaigns at national level in Slovakia, a deep fake audio of opposition candidate regarding minorities, but we also had a deep fake video or candidate or AI generated candidate in Croatia in the elections. So we see it's still a bit of a rudimentary use in the electoral campaign. It's still a bit of a more cheap fake than deep fake, but it's slowly coming. Yeah, and we might see now that mostly right-wing populist parties and left-wing activists have been using that, but we might see that this is moving more into the mainstream as we talk. And here, I think it is important to see that the European Union has come up with a regulation of AI, which is a horizontal legislation. So it means it's not necessarily only to cover elections and government, but also consumers, etc. Yeah, so it has a bigger impact, and it only came in force on the 1st of August this year. But the implementation will require another probably 2 years now to have it fully enforced. And that also requires secondary legislation by the European Union, especially on generative AI, which when it comes to elections.
Great, thank you. I think you raised some really important points. As we're talking about, the EU has finally taken some steps, which are really unprecedented and important. At the same time, we're just getting started, and it's going to take time for these processes to work. And at the end of the day, really, the EU is only as strong as its weakest member, right? I'm curious from your perspective, how do you think, to what extent has this hype around the level of impact of AI on the European Parliament elections, was it sustained, or is it, as you were kind of touching on this point of cheap fakes versus deep fakes, it's, you know, I think we see a lot of high volume, low quality, right, when it comes to AI. So do you think it had the impact that we anticipated, or actually were some of these measures successful and we're learning to deal with it?
Well, you know, it's probably difficult to measure because there's too little research out there yet. You know, from a really personal impression now, I would say it's as a society, we need to adapt to a new technology. And what's needed is information, communication, dialogue, and to sit down together and figure out, okay, what kind of role do we want AI to play in elections? Yeah, and to also understand the harm AI can do and the benefit AI can bring when it comes to elections. And I think that's where we are now. So there is a consultative process now ongoing with the European Union, with civil society, with experts, with academia, on the question, what is a prohibited or banned AI in elections and what is a high risk AI in elections. And I think there's a line to take, and there are measures and mitigating measures to be formulated and used. Yeah, and I think the EU is here very open also to advise and to receive examples where AI has been harmful. Yeah, and that's really the word the EU uses in its legislation: harmful content. Yeah, and here I also would like to reference the United Nations Human Rights Committee. And that was a long time before online campaigning became relevant. But they basically said every voter should independently be able to form an opinion without manipulative interference. Yeah, and I think that's what we should think of when we talk about AI, because if we look at the voters' ability to form his or her opinion in a debate, I think that's very important resource in a democratic society, and we should protect that, because with it comes the trust. And that brings me back to your question, that also these cheap fakes, they could erode trust in democratic societies. Yeah, and we have seen in the political campaigns which are going on now, and that's not, you know, we don't need to look beyond the Atlantic now, but we also have that in Austria in our own campaigning right now for the 29 general elections. So, you know, there is sometimes this tendency to lower the bar about what is ethically and morally possible and legitimate. And I think here it's probably the society and the political actors that are required to bring up the bar again in this respect.
Excellent. Thank you, Armin, so much. And I think you touch on the heart of very few very important points, including this idea of voters being able to have the opportunity to think and decide for themselves, which I think also touches back to this idea of a holistic approach and the importance of that. I think, you know, it's so important that we focus on how do we build the capacity of institutions, regulation, work together across sectors. But of course, civic education, media literacy is also so critical in terms of ensuring that that is possible. And then obviously that point about looking at how AI is not just a challenge, but how can we use AI and technology for good? And I hope we continue to dive into that today. So thank you so much. Ingrid, over to you. So we've had a lot of discussions around AI and the threats and challenges that it poses to elections and democratic processes. But I'm curious, are there any particular aspects about the impacts of AI that you feel like have been overlooked by democratic actors?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I've been lucky enough to be the last one to speak, so I can actually build on what the colleagues have said, which has been extremely informative and very useful. And we obviously have different angles based on our background and areas of study. I think there are several aspects that I would like to touch upon, and one of them has to do with a bit of an isolation when it comes to the several discussions and initiatives that are happening around this topic of artificial intelligence. In elections or in democratic processes, this is another discussion that it might be worth having. We perceive elections as a cycle, but we tend to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence without a specific target, let's say, around this cycle, and without acknowledging perhaps the different roles that individuals have across the electoral cycle and the different impacts that artificial intelligence can have on these individuals, on these processes, and on different societies depending on the local context. And one point that I would really like to make, because I see here colleagues, and Eastern Europe, it's of course a very difficult area, let's say, if not more than that, but not only Eastern Europe. I think there are many regions across the world that are facing huge crises in terms of democracy, but also like serious crisis as the war we're seeing now, like literally next to us. And I think it's highly important to have the opportunity to discuss the implications of the good and malign use of artificial intelligence and AI-enabled or power technologies in context marked by crisis, by conflict, or in areas of instability. Also, I think it's important in situations and contexts where we don't have these kind of crises yet, or we hopefully won't have them at all, to consider the implications of the use of these technologies at the intersection with security and human rights. We're seeing increasingly countries with high democratic performance that are implementing AI technologies, not only speaking now about generative AI technologies, which we've agreed that so far has not proven its potential in terms of impacting elections, although I would not undermine the potential for the future. But I'm speaking about a wider range of AI-enabled technologies that are being experimented already at different levels by different democratic actors with different intentions as well. I mean, of course, we're seeing countries with high performance in terms of democratic indicators that are already implementing AI for security reasons. Of course, we can trust them by heart and we can assume that that's for a good purpose. But then as it happened with disinformation and as it happens with internet shutdowns nowadays, we're seeing less democratic actors that are pointing towards countries that are using AI for this purpose, that are implementing such measures, similar measures with objectives or with intentions that usually aim to serve their non-democratic agendas. So I think we have the opportunity to, unlike it was the case with like the initial developments in disinformation space that came with this bidirectional communication enabled by platforms and by Web 2.0, I think we still have the opportunity not to adapt as the challenges unfold, but rather to have this preemptive early warning, early alert, early intervention, as it was mentioned by the colleagues, as we get to assess and understand what are the negative implications of the use of AI. And since I assume I won't have the chance to speak much more or to answer a second question, because we also want to have a Q&A session, as short as it will be, I will touch upon something that it's very close to my work now and that has been inspired by several projects that I've had the opportunity to work on with Susanna, with colleagues from IFES Ukraine, with Daria, and with some other colleagues from other organizations. It's an initiative of developing an AI preparedness index on the adoption. It's actually it has two dimensions. On one side is the preparedness to manage the risks, to assess the level of resilience and to absorb and exit from crises that can be generated by malign actors through the use of AI technology. And then the other dimension is the positive one, which has to do with the preparedness of the country and of the EMB to implement, adopt AI technologies in electoral processes across the electoral cycle, with an important focus on the impact of the individuals with different roles across the electoral cycle. And speaking to your question, I think the gender dimension and the impact of these kind of technologies on marginalized groups, particularly in areas of conflict, of crisis, it tends to be overlooked. So briefly, this is, I hope I managed to touch upon most of the things I had in mind. Otherwise, probably as a final idea, slowing down a bit the pace to make sure we get to make the proper assessments of the risks would be something perhaps beneficial. And another thing I think would be raising the awareness of the implications, even when it comes to the developers, because I was saying that we kind of work in a bit of an isolation. The democracy experts tend to understand the implications, potential implications of such technologies from their perspective, but then the developers many times do not have the dimension of what is the negative potential of their development. So I guess these kind of events and these kind of initiatives that you guys are having are commendable, and I think bringing stakeholders together at the same table and raising awareness and then developing strategies, it's something that it's probably worth considering more often and in a more strategic way. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ingrid, and to all of our panelists. I'm so glad you touched on that. I hope we can also dive more into that during session 3 in terms of actually taking advantage of the wealth of knowledge in this room and thinking about some of those strategies But I'm also so glad that you mentioned this very important and often overlooked aspect of gender disinformation, gender-based violence, and also how AI and technology also has a disproportionately high impact on those issues. So now I'm very excited for us to actually move to the Q&A. We'll have the opportunity to take both questions from the room and online. I have many more questions, but I want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from all of you. So I open the floor to you all.
Hello, my name is Georgi. We are from Central Election Commission of Georgia. First of all, we want to thank you for possibility to share this symposium with you and to tell in short, our country has to deal with a lot of fake news, fake information through social networks. And I want to ask all speakers and especially Marian, who told us about fake news, and in the presentation she has, you mentioned some kind of compass, and we want to know how it is possible to detect this information and how this really works in the way you tell about it, and can you share more experience about it, because we have fact checkers, but in terms of quantity of disinformation, they can't deal all with them. And we want to implement this in our country. And how do you think, is it possible to do it? Thank you.
Great, thank you, and welcome, Georgia Sisi. Marian, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Georgi, for that very important question. I know that your country is in a very important stage right now. And actually, regarding your question about how to detect it, we have an extensive toolkit designed for different target groups, be it people from young age or for different professions. So I would be happy to share these resources in writing with you if you like. And if you want a special online session or course with us, we would also be very happy to deliver it to you if that works. So maybe we can establish contacts after this session. But while I have the floor, I wanted to just echo also on the first question asked, and I have to say that all the points by panelists, I agree very much. And if you are targeted, then it means that you are doing something right. So keep going. From the European Parliament, when the newly elected European Parliament came together in July in Strasbourg, then the first resolution that the Parliament adopted was saying that we need more sanctions against Russia, we need more sanctions against Belarus, and we need to increase the support for Ukraine, including funding and including also the military aid. And this resolution was backed by 495 members from the newly elected Parliament. And immediately we, as Parliament, as an institution, faced a disinformation campaign launching against the reputation of the Parliament or different members who are advocating more strongly against these positions. So individuals face it, but also institutions and politicians. So I want to echo right back. So keep doing what you are doing. You are on the right track. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marian. And yes, we'll be sure to connect all of you here today via email so that we can exchange also more of those resources. We also have a great question online from Peter Thompson, the Victoria University of Wellington. Could I please ask the panel for specific examples where AI deepfakes have been used effectively for nefarious influence on electoral processes and examples of how AI could be used to counter such threats? Is there anyone who wants to take that one?
I mean, I'm happy to answer. We are not able to assess the impact. I mean, yeah, effectively. I mean, where was this information used effectively? Did we manage to establish that? I mean, we have some ideas, but we have also studies that contradict our initial perceptions. So I totally get the point. I hope I get the point of the question in terms of the liabilities in terms of, sorry, the limitations when it comes to assessing the proper, the real impact of this. And actually, I was discussing yesterday with Susanna, because I've recently, together with a colleague from Colombia, an assessment. It doesn't have to do with the EU, of course, but it's just an example, an assessment on the use of, on the attacks against women in elections in Mexico. You know that there have been 2 women candidates. And the result of our quantitative research showed that actually only 3% of the top tweets were gender-based attacks. And the assumption and the narratives in the media have been quite high in relation to those kind of attacks. So I think it was said, I think we lack proper investigation, proper analysis, and even a framework for, and this has been a debate in, I think, among the expert community on how to properly assess actually the impact. So yeah, a very good question. And perhaps if anyone wants to add anything, I mean, it has been used to some extent, but in most of the cases, I think it was satirical use or pamphlets and used with significances that at least apparently wasn't meant to be as harmful. Of course, we know that these kind of formats tend to hide more malign or damaging intentions.
Yeah.
Great points. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question from the online space and audience. I would refer to our report of our election assessment mission, which we publish later this week, later this month. And here we come up with a good practice example where we say there was this doppelganger operation, yeah, and it started some 2 years back, and it resurfaced ahead of the European Parliament election. So it basically was a orchestrated operation coming from Russia, where official websites of media were plagiated, yeah, with false and false content. So again, like Ingrid said, it's difficult to measure the impact, but definitely the impact was there because they succeeded in questioning whether we have the adequate measures in place to keep and safeguard our journalistic and media space. Yeah. On the other hand, it's a good practice example because this InfoLab and Meta detected it and prevented it, and by showcasing it as interference from outside, it also might backfire, and we are more alert that this could happen. We need to put up our safeguards, and we need to be aware that this could happen again. So as with the election management bodies, which have to prepare for cybersecurity threats, also the media houses, journalists have to build up the cybersecurity protection.
Yes, excellent points. I think you touch on also this idea of striking a balance between raising awareness of these issues, but also being careful to not further amplify some of these disinformation narratives and further undermine public trust in the processes. And I think it also goes back to Susanna's really important point earlier of, 6 months before an election is not enough time. I mean, from the perspective of IFES, I can truly share that. It takes time. A year before an election is, not much time to start preparing institutions in particular and societies. And so I think also going back to this idea of it takes time to prepare these immune systems, and really it's a kind of throughout the life cycle type of endeavor, I think, for all of us. We can take one final question. I believe, Alban, did you have a question? Over to you.
It's not a question, rather a comment or a message, let's say.
Great.
I'm Alban Krasnici. I'm a member of a Central Election Commission of Kosovo. It was discussed pretty much about legal acts that the EU has been taking to somehow address the issues regarding to AI and cyber attacks and so on. But since we have the Marian here, the EU Parliament spokesperson unit, just my message would be that the EU has as a composition of the countries, EU countries, to do more on supporting the non-EU members within the EU, within the Europe, so that to support in terms of fighting the let's say the risk or these developments related to AI, and having in mind as well the capacities that these countries have. So, for instance, Kosovo does not have the capacities to fight or to intervene on issues related to AI, to disinformation, and so on. So less resources, less capacities, and not only Kosovo, I think the whole Balkan. And we can see that the political map has been changing not only in EU institutions, but as well in EU countries and in Balkans as well. And we know these changes are pretended to go. So I think it's time to have a fast reaction and to be prepared, and not then later on just complaining what was happening and how to then react. So it's better to take steps now. And I think one of the opportunities is that EU institutions to do more and to support more the Balkan countries, but as well the countries in other regions which are within Europe as a geographical map, but why not even outside it, to support them in let's say in creating proper mechanisms, infrastructure to deal with AI, and why not even using AI for our benefit. So that's my message, let's say, or comment related to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Alban. And you touch on a really important and relevant point as we talk about foreign interference, especially from the Kremlin. I mean, the Balkans, among other regions, have been one of the primary targets, especially as their efforts to integrate into EU and you know, be parts of NATO. So very important considerations. And of course, the challenges that EMBs face in terms of bandwidth are very important to consider. I think that's also where cross-sectoral coordination is really important and comes into play.